So I'm here because I'm in love with this, right? This awesome blue marble that's floating through this incredible black universe. And I mean, how can you not just look at that and be like, oh, you know? And then when we take a closer look, I'm in love with, I mean, I'm such a geek when it comes to falling in love with nature. I mean, who wouldn't want to just hang out with some lotus and lily and just drip water on it all day long, watching what happens? Or even things like this, which have been given many unfortunate names in its history, because it's not necessarily the most attractive of all lizards. But would you not love to have the ability to put your body in wet sand and lap up liquid to drink? This is an Australian mullock. And I really like barnacles. If I'm ever near an intertidal zone, you could sit and just watch those barnacles and just mesmerized at their lives right there on that rocky shore and that edge. And of course, they live their entire lives upside down, right? It's their head down and their filter feed up. I would love to have textiles that are sort of this amazing colors, and this is a close-up of an incredibly colorful lizard. And of course, we've been geeking out quite a bit about mycorrhiza the last few days. And these toadstools that appear above the surface, the mushrooms, are such a small fraction of the full story of the rest of the organism underneath the soil. These deer elephants, I got to spend some time in Botswana last year, getting really, really close to these amazing beings. And did you know that they have sensors in the bottom of their feet that allow them to detect Rayleigh waves? And so they can tell when an earthquake is coming long before it arrives. We also have those same sensors in our knees, but we've sort of lost our antenna to recognize when we feel that same sensation. And then if you take a closer look, right, at things that we often don't give any attention to, this is a butterfly. And in fact, in a purest act of resilience, it has not just one tube to suck up nectar. You can actually see that there's two tubes that are coiled together. So you can always guarantee that food supply. And despite their incredible ungainliness, they are so well adapted to life on the landscape, and seeing wild ostrich this last year was pretty impressive as well. But sea urchins, I mean, look up close at a sea urchin sometime. It's not a scary thing, it's an absolutely amazing thing. In fact, each of these spines is a single crystal. Huge. Those spines that you see, that's one crystal. We're not the only beings that like to look deep into each other's eyes. But even something like an aloe, I mean, you see this and you want to caress it. You have to watch out for the little spines on the edge, but they're incredibly, just so luscious. Right? Peacocks, I got to see peacocks in the wild last year. That's really surreal because you're only used to seeing them in the zoo or in a farm. And to actually see them running around in the wild is in their native habitat in India is pretty crazy. And of course, bees. We got to spend time with bees yesterday. And Catherine normally goes on and on and on about her bees because there's so many amazing stories. In fact, I have in one of my classes a quiz that says, name one function out of this list of 12 that bees don't do. And they have to go to Ask Nature, and they just there's dozens of pages about bees alone in Ask Nature. But even old growth sea kelp, these amazing stories of these forests. Imagine snorkeling in that kind of space. I don't find that creepy at all, but absolutely mesmerizing. And I did my doctoral studies on cooperation and mutualism, and I've always been a huge fan of these incredible stories of organisms interacting. And here you've got a cleaner shrimp cleaning Nemo, right? Or cleaning a clownfish, which also has a mutualism with a sea anemone. And the cleaner shrimp has a similar mutualism with the sea anemone, so they got a little three-way thing going. And I love dragonflies. I mean, just staring at those wings and that incredible structure. I mean, the forces that is acted on such a small, thin membrane and the structures that support that. Zebras. I mean, like only Dr. Seuss could come up with zebras, right? But there they are on the landscape, living well, thriving. And you know, the classic camouflage story and confuse the predator is only part of it. It turns out that those black and white stripes are also a cooling mechanism. They have a little bit more fat underneath the black and a little bit less under the white. And because of the difference in how the black absorbs heat, they create little convection currents with those stripes. I've not particularly been fond of things that are slimy, I have to admit. But if you've ever seen a banana slug in the field, I mean, these things are like this big. Right? They're huge and aptly named. They do look like bananas. And imagine like not having legs, but having, you know, lubrication that glides you across your land and constantly producing that lubrication. We saw these, and you know, in Africa, you're trying desperately to take pictures of them because they're so incredibly beautiful, but they're on the move all the time. And not too long ago, got to spend some time in some really old growth rainforest, temperate rainforest, just amazing. I mean, talk about humbling, right? To be amongst these incredible giants. And then I'm a huge fan of giant clams. And not that long ago, a couple months ago, was on the Great Barrier Reef. And the water's cold and you're wearing a wetsuit. And I'm trying to dive down so I can hug these clams. And everybody thinks I'm nuts. And then you dive down and then the buoyancy of the wetsuit sort of pops you back up and you try to dive down and hug these amazing clams. They're like this big. And I'm not exaggerating. They've been there for 100 years or more, you know, the living specimens that I was witnessing. And then there's all of you, right? That's another reason to be here, for the incredible passion that not just everybody here in this room, but this community represents of sort of being like these great ralliers for this great blue planet. And I think it's important that we remember that there's that love affair that we have with those species and with our fellow humans is a huge part of why we're all doing this work in the world. So I met Janine in January of 1998, a few months after the book came out, and really this story to this point has been 1 inch at a time, right? You can't possibly fathom what's ahead. You can't possibly have all of the answers. And in every one of those inches, or centimeters here in Europe, you might do it 1 centimeter at a time, you contemplate and sort of figure out what's our next step, what's our next move. And at the beginning, we thought all we had to do was sort of like just shout at the top of the trees, look at this incredible stuff, we can learn from it. And then everybody would come running, and they would do that, and then we'd be all set. And of course, we learned that that was not enough. Some, you know, definitely got some that said, oh yeah, I'm interested. Then trying mechanisms to sort of spread the meme on the wind, talking wherever we could, you know, huge audiences. At one point, when I spoke at Bioneers, I had about 5,000 in the room and another 13,000 online. And that's kind of like doing it the dandelion way, just casting those seeds and hoping some will stick, and some do, but it's still not enough. So then, what if we dispersed to very targeted audiences and showing up in smaller settings and smaller conferences and very intentional, and that helps, and that grabs a few more people engage and want to help. And then we realized, well, okay, so now everybody's excited and then they want to access that biology, but how do you get to the biology? And so we built a platform. We built Ask Nature as a means. It started off as sort of the biomimicry database, and then eventually we released Ask Nature in 2010, which continues to grow. It's now a project of the Biomimicry Institute. And there are thousands of strategies on there, and people can go and spend hours and hours and hours exploring. And as a biologist, I know there's basically nothing on there yet, right? There's so much more that we can include and add to this platform. And then we learned, okay, well, you can put it there, but that's, that gets a few more people, but it's still not enough. And so now we need to actually translate that genius, and in very targeted ways do that explanation of translating, here's how this specific strategy, organism, lesson from humans, lessons from other organisms can apply to your work. Okay, so we did that, and that helped, but then we needed to train, and so we started training people, and I'll talk more about the training process. As you might have seen people with their pins on here, there's a few that have taken some of the longer trainings with us. And that's been a huge piece of the puzzle of not just, okay, I see that it's out there, it's super exciting, I have a database, I'm getting some translated biology, now I'm getting trained in how to do it, and what I'm supposed to do. And then, we finally realized that we need to infect people, that we would like biomimicry to be a virus for which there is no cure. And probably most of you know that you are infected, and that's a good thing. And you can turn around and go infect others. And that is one of the fastest and surest ways we know to spread behaviors in the world, is to infect others. And so that's been part of our strategy. And then, making way for swarms, the networks, the individuals that have sort of rallied in all of these different communities. Biomimicry Netherlands is a fabulous example of that. It is because of people like Saskia and Kodrin and Boeen and the team here that we're here, right? That this conference is happening here. And swarms in all of these different pockets around the world are doing amazing, amazing work. And then trying to build those bridges, showing up, and now that I've contacted and seen all these people all around the world, then you meet one person, oh, you have to talk to this person. And building those connections do amazing things as well. I would love to have eyes on stalks, to be able to see 360 degrees, and being aware of these amazing opportunities that pop up, when you least expect it, and being willing to act on every one of them. And all of these things that I'm sharing, all of these strategies, they've been ours, and they should also be yours. These are also the work that you can do in the world, and having every one of these in your back pocket is an important way to move forward. And then templating the practice, okay? So getting what does this mean down into models and the resource handbook and the biomimicry thinking and life's principles, and putting those templates out there in the world so others can draw and learn from them, and translating them into Dutch and into Spanish and German and French and Italian and Chinese and wherever we can. And not only just building those models, but putting them into practice and trying them out and testing them and evolving them. And if you take a close look at the diagrams, in a lot of human diagrams, we put the V for version 6 or version 3 or V3 or V8. Well, we put a little G because it's generation 3 or generation 8, because they're constantly evolving and adapting as they learn to fit in new habitats. And really about fostering the emergence of ecosystems. It is at the ecosystem level where all of these pieces come together that this work can thrive. But above it all and throughout it all, the key to the way we go forth is having the ethos piece of biomimicry. So it is not just the question of how do we go about solving these challenges in a sustainable manner, but what challenges are we going to solve? What are we going to work on where is our time best spent? And do we have the kind of gratitude and appreciation for the mentors? All of those pieces are critical to the ethos component of biomimicry. And it is about reconnecting. It's not about simply abstracting this data in the lab or using a computer database and never actually having that connection with the natural world, which is why I started with all of those beautiful mentors to remind us that they're out there. And I think they're rooting for us. You know, I think they're saying, come on guys, figure this out. We're kind of counting on you. And that reconnect reminds us that we are nature, that's a fundamental piece of how we have to go about this work in the world. And then of course, the piece around emulate. And that's the part that makes the news. That's the part that people hear the stories and they see how this organism or this process or system led to this particular innovation. And that's good because that's a doorway, that's an entry point for people that may not have started with that ethos or started with the reconnect. Well, they're totally psyched about innovation. And that is a way to enter these places. And what I have witnessed over all these years is it doesn't matter which of those three you enter in, you're then infected, and then the other two eventually catch up with you. And so in this time, Jay mentioned yesterday that there's 600 case studies. In fact, that's just the number that we've been able to get on Ask Nature. There's more than we can keep track of. There's more than, it used to be I kind of knew all of them. I could stand on stage and say, this is what's happening. And I can't even keep track anymore. I mean, there are at least one or two a day that sort of come through my Google alerts, which is pretty impressive. And so much that we have, like, this is our little screenshot of the PowerPoint template of how we sort of build our case studies when we're trying to pull this stuff together for talks. It really struck me a couple of years ago, I was asked to go to Hamburg to help with a new cruise ship, the Peace Ship, which is a Japanese company that has these year-long cruises, and they do, instead of getting off and doing the tourist thing, they get off and they do humanitarian efforts in this year-long cruise, which is super cool, because I'm not really a cruise person, but I thought, now that's a cruise that would be interesting. And they asked me to bring biomimetic technologies that could be relevant, possibly, and useful on this cruise ship. And I came with 55 biomimetic technologies that all had relevance just for this one ship. And so it was just one case study after another, which was really powerful to think about, that there's that many things happening out there in the world. And as you know, I have been working on the practice. I've been working on the verb of biomimicry. And it's really about this chasm, this real disconnect between our human design challenges and biology, and needing to build that bridge. And so there's a lot to the methodology that can be taught about how to walk over what we call the function bridge and find the kinds of biological intelligence that you're looking for, the strategies. Bring that challenge with you so that you frame it in such a way, and then find the great biology, abstract a design principle, and go back. So that's, of course, like a lecture, right? That's a educational university, here's how you do it, roll up your sleeves, practice. But what I wanted to really share with you here today are some other kinds of things that I've learned in the field that aren't so much about those specifics of how to do the practice. You can take my class if you want to learn about that. And instead, a little bit more about what it means to kind of be trying to implement this. And we've heard some stories yesterday of some things that are working well and some things that aren't working. And so I'll just add my collection to that. So this story of money, right? This idea of ROI, return on investment. seems to be a driving factor in our society. And of course, biomimicry is experiencing that. You know, as Jay mentioned yesterday, you can have the greatest idea, this amazing engineering. You didn't say yesterday, but I remember you telling me that they didn't even believe the statistics until you brought them to the lab and proved how incredibly efficient this was. And yet that alone was not enough until you demonstrated ROI. And so we've been thinking a lot about what does ROI mean for biomimicry. And I want to share with you some examples. So the classic return on investment. We heard from Hiani yesterday about Interface and their biomimicry endeavors. In fact, the very first workshop that I gave was at Interface. I was a little younger then than I am now. And I got off the plane and David Oki, who is the lead designer for Interface, picked me up at the airport, and you know, I was in my mid-20s. And he sort of like, oh shit, I've invited all of these really important executives and I've got this girl showing up here. And he asks me as we get in the car, he's like, so, how many of these workshops have you done before? And I said, well, yours is the first for such a large company, you know? And it wasn't actually at the very first workshop, it was at a subsequent workshop. But Entropy, which is more than $350 million in annual sales, was born out of a 2-day workshop. So if you want to do simple math, that's a pretty impressive ROI, right? So of course there was, some development dollars in figuring out how you actually manifest this, but the benefits that have rolled out from that have been huge. And it's one of the few where it's literally possible to document, okay, this was the amount we invested, and this is what we got out of it. In most, if not all of our other work in the world, it's very, very difficult to put those dollar figures on the kind of work that at least we bring to the table. This was another interesting one. So I went to a company that was interested in resealable packaging, and they wanted to make sure that the Ziploc thing was not working for them, and a lot of food was wasted because they couldn't create the seal. So we were trying to deal with food waste issues. And so they proposed this to me in the meeting, and so, okay, well, how would nature open and close seals? And repeatedly, because it's a bag that you open and close, and of course it has to work, it has to be effective. And then they went on to say, well, you need to do it on the same equipment at the same speed with the same materials that we're currently using, and it has to cost less than 1 cent a package, right? And so my previous sort of wide open, I can think of lots of cool biology for this, went whoo, really quick. And I'm like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to help you. And you know what they said to me? They said, that's okay. We want you to try anyhow, because you're at the bottom of our list of 47 consultants that we've interviewed, and we have nobody left, right? They had tried all of the traditional measures and decided that they were willing to give us a whirl. So we said, okay, we'll give it a try. And in fact, we did identify a number of organisms at a couple of different ways to think about it. And when they got the biology, they didn't quite know what to do with it. So they took it to some packaging design students at the University of Michigan and said, design with this, right? This is what we're trying to achieve, design with this. They actually ended up with 3 patents out of the project. Of course, these patents didn't meet all of their criteria, but in the process, they expanded and realized maybe our criteria is a little ridiculous. And so this is one of them that came from the Venus flytrap, which is based on this idea of tension, opening and closing. And so you add tension to open, and then the natural tension in the materials collapses it down again. So that's the work of those design students. So relatively speaking, that's not a bad ROI for that particular process, especially since we were at the bottom of their list. Now, here's been a more recent success. Of course, it's been a lot of work getting to the point of where you can offer a master's degree online. And I know we have a couple of students from the program here today. And when I worked with a couple different universities before Arizona State University said, yes, we'd love to adopt your program. And so for them, they actually didn't have to put a whole lot of investment in because, we had to run it through the hoops in order to be accredited. But I had been building that program with the help of our faculty in order to sort of deliver it to ASU. And the dean of the online school said to me, he said, don't call it biomimicry because nobody's never heard of that and nobody will ever sign up. It's like, I think I want to call it biomimicry. Okay. And he said, but I'll tell you what, you have to have at least 10 to 15 students in the first year, or we just can't make this a viable program. Our best programs bring in about 20 students a year, and we want to see that in the beginning. Of course, they grow over time, but that's what we want to see. And so in the first year, we did. And what's super cool is that it was dispersed around the world. But we had 169 students in the first year. And I think that's a pretty good ROI in terms of showing that kind of demand and interest that's out there in the world. So those are all things that you can put real numbers around and try to do financial, but that's not the only kind of ROI that's out there. We've been playing with this idea of ROI. And I think another one might be the results of inspiration. And that's definitely a byproduct of biomimicry out in the world. I got to take this picture. These things are so cool. They're like this big, a Maori wrasse, and talk about having a cool outfit that they get to wear every day, right? So in this particular case, this was a company that was also similar, except it wasn't a packaging issue, but they were concerned about dry goods absorbing moisture from the air, and then they get stale, and then people throw them away. And so how can they manage that? And they were actually mostly interested in the consumer experience, so the consumer not having stale tasting food. And we approached it from a food waste perspective. And this particular organism, a snail, and in fact it's the epiphragm that they were most interested in, which is that shell. It's like the foot. It's like the bottom of the foot, and it grows every day. So it's a very, very quick forming layer that keeps moisture inside the shell. But it turned out that not only did they solve their consumer experience problem, they also cut the amount of sugar in the product by 50% as a result, and were able to eliminate a huge portion of their drying ovens. And so this is like a massive product, and so taking the drying ovens out of the food processing was a huge savings for them. This one was a cosmetics company down in South America, and they were very curious about scent. There's just the question of scent. They just said, just tell us how nature does scent. And so we did a Bio 360 process, and after that, the inspiration that their team got out of it, they found 8 new, not just individual products, but like whole lines of offerings that they could develop because of the new ways that it got them thinking about scent. And including many important things like water-based scents instead of solvent-based scents, and long-lasting scents, so you don't have to add new chemistry. And of course, again, we take a sustainability approach to all of this, and some of their offerings were around solving real issues for real people in healthcare and navigation, other things. In this particular one, I actually can't show the organism that they found as their perfect model. But this company was, when you have moisture in a dry good, like a paper product, you're only be able to get 50% of it out. That's sort of the laws of physics. Water doesn't drive from, all the way and completely wick out. And they were trying to overcome, basically, the laws of physics in this way. Right? Get more than 50% of the moisture out of the product so that doesn't all end up in the trash and therefore isn't serving the purpose of why they put it in the product in the first place. And so we gave them a bunch of interesting ideas, including the wax on cockroaches. And this is a sea hare, a kind of mollusk that's got this cool sort of mechanism to expel liquids into liquids in a very effective way. But the organism that they fell in love with was one that, a mammal whose hair does exactly what they wanted to do. And it's the only mammal in the world that has a hair like that. And it was like a duplicate model of what they really needed. And so now they're on that path to figure out how to mimic and do further research and mimic that fiber. And then I don't think we can deny how important in this return on inspiration there is in providing hope, right? So this was Janine at Bioneers. And the sort of enthusiasm, and if any of you have ever given lectures that people have for this, you cannot let that go. That opportunity to provide hope in people's lives is a huge return on inspiration. It's a huge result that biomimicry offers the world. And while they may not act right away, you've infected them. It's stuck. And if anything, you've given them a gift of feeling good about the world for that short period of time, and they won't forget that. And I'm telling you as much as I'm telling myself, because there's times when I get really annoyed and I'm like, and everybody stood up and they were so excited, and then they all went home and did the same thing they always do, but remembering that you've sort of created this space of feeling good and reminding themselves about their love of nature or their love of humanity is a really important thing that we in biomimicry can offer the world. So there's some results of inspiration, but it's not the only ROI out there. We also think there's the risk of ignoring. Right? What does it mean to not pay attention to this? And I think, Jay laid out a number of great examples yesterday for these companies of like, really? You're going to ignore this? Oh yeah, by the way, I just took away all of your market share, So this was an interesting one that we did this year. Very, very interested in addressing the issue of cavities, especially in poorer populations where it's not so easy to get to the dentist, maybe don't have the best opportunities for teeth care. And so what would it look like to have a home-based product that can reverse the demineralization process that goes on with cavities? And so, of course, mineralization is like pretty common phenomena in the natural world. These are foraminifera under a microscope. And what was really interesting with this particular group is we brought them in and we thought they would get really excited about very specific chemistry and lessons, but it was the deep patterns across all of these organisms that were the most informative to them. And one of the things that it did for them is it got rid of their in-house human biases, right? Their view of how it had to play out. And one anecdote that I remember reflecting on is you have all these like super smart PhD chemists, material scientists, and they go, none of these organisms are doing biomineralization in one step. It's 2 steps. And, yeah? Really? We could do it in 2 steps? We've been trying all this time to do it in 1 step and we haven't been getting anywhere. And that was like this huge opening for them. And then of course there were all these other pieces of those deep patterns that became incredibly informative. And so the risk of not paying attention to that, can you imagine sort of the path you could go down and invest all of these R&D dollars and then lo and behold, it wasn't that complicated if you just considered it in 2 steps instead of 1. This one was an interesting one. This company approached us. They were in the category that Taryn talked about yesterday of green. They're like, I will meet regulatory mandates and we will be green because of it, right? And so some new laws were coming out of California, and their chemical product would not work in those new laws in California. And so they asked us to come in, and they had a multifunctional challenge, and we presented all sorts of things, including this tree foam frog, the southern tree foam nesting frog. And but then in the process of us working on the project, they had in their own lab, the chemists had come up with some other solution. And they're like, oh, we don't want your stuff. We found a way to meet the California regulations. And okay, fine. And so the project was dropped, but then shortly thereafter, other regulations came into place, and their chemists were without a solution anymore. And so had they continued to go down this path, it's not about staying one incremental step ahead of the regulators, but actually completely staying way far ahead so that you've got lots of buffer, lots of cushion to work in that space. This project we did a while ago, and it was for a company that was trying to deal more effectively with blood stains, so that you don't have to use so much wash water in hospitals and bleach, and eliminating some of those chlorine issues and so on. And one of the greatest things that they said for us in feedback from the biology that we presented to them was they went, oh, you know, now I understand why the last 10 years of research didn't work, right? And the biology that we presented was enough for them to completely rethink as they went forward, but they calculated how much R&D they had spent on that project all along, and it had been all down the wrong path. This was a project in India where the urban planners were designing, there's 100 new cities planned for India in the next 25 years of 1 million people each. So put that into perspective. And they're building them from scratch. And this was one that was planned for the top of some degraded mountains that had been grazed and overgrazed by goats for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. All the good topsoil is down in the bottom, so you're sort of looking at the cross section of the plateau where they were going to build the city so they could keep the croplands intact. And the urban planners were working on this project, and I think Taryn, you were part of this team, and they wanted to use life's principles to sort of look at their design. And gratefully, in doing so, one of the things that they identified was that they had one wastewater treatment facility of one type in one location for this entire city of 1 million people. And one of the things about resilience that was revealed in the life's principles is, no, that's not a very resilient strategy. And as a result, then they changed their plan so that they had not just 5 different plants, but they had different kinds of plants in different locations in order to build that up. And that's just one small cell of a whole array of cells that we worked on with them. So had they ignored it, who knows what could happen down the line. Okay, so there's more ROIs as well. And there is the reality of integration. So what does it mean? And I think we've heard some great lessons yesterday of, sounds good, it's great, it all works, and there's some real issues around making some of this happen. So here's a couple of stories, and these are offered more for organizations that want to adopt biomimicry, things to be aware of, right? Things to keep in mind and keep track of. So this was a project we worked on where a waste-to-energy company, so basically burning garbage, wanted to make sure that they had no heavy metals leaving in their waste stream, so especially cadmium and lead, which are really small and they attach to those little microparticles. And so they posed this question to us. But I don't know that they were necessarily prepared to actually innovate around the solutions that we had. They knew they needed to do it. And in fact, so we needed to capture microparticulates from this flowing, hot, heterogeneous air, because garbage is different every day. You never know what's coming through, and how to capture that. And we presented a number of examples, and in fact, we had one biological solution which seemed actually really rather feasible. And so this is mangroves, and mangrove roots are very, very good at filtering random-sized microparticles from flowing fluids. Maybe not hot ones, but flowing fluids. And in fact, they do settle that sediment out of the water. And the biology translated, and you can see here, this is what an abstracted design principle looks like, is a network of firm tubes, aka roots, transform laminar flow of water into areas of eddies and stagnation zones. All right, so that's the sort of brown on the right, that cause the suspended particles, sand and nutrients, to settle out, but then it creates high flow jet streams between so that you don't reduce any flow velocity. All right, so there's no biology in there, but there's a really strong message in there. And that was important for them because they have to use fans to keep the air moving. And if you put a lot of filters in the way, then it takes a lot more energy to move that air moving. So this was very interesting. And one of the engineers in the design charrette goes, oh, that's really interesting because we have a lot of these firm tubes already in our system. They're the pipes that are holding the thing. And I always find a lot of dust on the back side of them. And we're like, well, there you go. And so, and in fact, we had other strategies that could be used to grab, basically put some fins on those pipes in order to actually make sure that dust sticks and stays, and that's what they could clean up. They were so excited about it, but then they were like, but we're not, we're operational engineers. We don't have an R&D department. And they didn't have partners. The companies that make their bag filters were not the right kind of ones. They didn't really have budget for that kind of stuff. There was actually a very tangible, simple solution, but they weren't prepared to innovate around it. And so, and we don't know up front. Who knew that this is what the solution, they thought we were going to come up with a new kind of mesh work for the filter bags. And they were like, we're just going to go ask our bag companies, our bag partners to make that. But this was actually a better and smarter and cheaper solution, but they had no way to work on it. We, over a span of 10 years, the first company contacted us 10 years prior, and the second company not too long ago, and they were both interested in this idea of both packaging and dispersing liquid products. So we pulled together all sorts of cool biology on how nature does that. Both of them wanted to do it sustainably. The first company had not prepared their design firm, their product design firm partners, with biomimicry. And so they gave them all the biology, and the designers were like, what the hell is this? What are we supposed to do with this? We have no idea, and therefore nothing actually ever came from it. But the second firm did. In fact, they had us come in and give a training to their product designers. And so when the biology arose, they generated lots and lots of ideas. And this one's actually on the market. So this, I guess I've given away the name of the company. But, and so they were very excited about these sort of flexible pouches, which Natura, yes, yeah. And the flexible pouches, they don't have to ship these empty bottles. Like they can bring 10,000 pouches in the same amount of volume that 200 bottles took before. Consumers get every drop of their product out of it. And then because of it uses something like 85% less plastic for the same volume. And it's much more recyclable as a result. So it came from, and I don't remember which of the biology that we provided that it came from. But again, they had prepared their partners in order to know what to do with this biology. This was a high-end car company that was, of course, their designers were going for sexy and for safety. And when you put a lot of metal in your car in order to provide the structure and the safety for if there's a crash, then you can't use a lot of cool glass, and you can't actually see very well out because you don't have as much glass. And so it's this interesting tension between safety and both the people on the street that don't get hit, the person in the car seeing oncoming whatever. And so we presented a lot of different ways to think about how they could get lightweight and strong. And this is actually the inside of a cattail. So those long, thin leaves. I mean, have you ever thought about how those things stand up, right? In the wind, and then they bounce right back? Well, if you look on the inside here, these are long cells, like bricks. And there's guy wires almost. It's under tensegrity, so there's these strands that go between these cells and sort of hold the whole thing up. And some of their engineers were like really jazzed about it, but a couple of them were like, "We can't build a car out of cattails. That's just not going to work." No, we're not talking about building a car out of cattails. But it was so against their mental model of a thick steel member that they couldn't imagine even how to manifest this design principle using metal, using aluminum and steel cables. And while there were some champions in those design charrettes, there were others that just could not consider what they thought was completely impossible. And so again, being open to how you can unpack this work. This is actually one that I think is particularly true for biomimicry and potentially for other sustainability kinds of champions. Thank you. And this was a huge company. They were interested in completely replacing all their water bottles. And we were like, oh, this could be super cool. And we did all of the work, and we delivered the biological intelligence, and we were getting ready to do the design charrette, and the champion internally quit, and left. And so when she left, all the projects that she was working on died. And it was because she wasn't nurtured. She got so excited about the potential, so excited about biomimicry, sustainability, and she was in a context that could not support that. And we've had that happen to us probably almost a dozen times, where the internal champion sort of falls in love with biomimicry, it leaves, comes, joins us, goes back. Teresa's our champion that's gone back. But it's really important to sort of nurture the champions and give them the space to be creative and be innovative and keep going and not feel like they're spending all their time banging their head against the wall. And then this one, it was the hardest week of my life, spending a week with 25 PhDs from a company. And the biggest thing was their ability to quiet human cleverness, or their lack thereof. And the ones that did the best in the workshop and got the most ideas were the ones that were willing to sort of set aside their preconceived notions about how the world worked. And they weren't trying to prove that they deserved a PhD or whatever it might be. And I think that's a really important part of this. So I got the green flag, so I'm going to have to speed up a little bit here. But I didn't want to leave out the last and favorite one of the ripple of impact for ROI. Interface started with that carpet, and this is a little bit about that messy journey on the biomimicry thinking diagram. But the ripple of that success has been huge. There are, lots of people that have received training. I mean, we've been partners with them for such a long time. And it's not just been in the product, it's also been in process, it's been in systems, it's been in organizational development. The latest work that we're doing with them right now is Factory as a Forest, and we're helping them redesign a factory in Australia and in Georgia in the United States, so that the factory functions, performs at the same ecological standards level as the ecosystem in which it's located, And then even cooler is they're now asking that their suppliers start subscribing to Factory as a Forest. And they're part of a section of highway that Ray Anderson the foundation is supporting to do all these cool, innovative technologies. And they're asking all the companies that are lining up on that highway and are going to build there to also do their Factory as a Forest. So that's how that ripple of impact increases. Our first workshop in 2003 had a handful of people, mostly from the US, and then we kept offering workshops and people kept coming, and these are people that are investing a significant amount of their time and their lives to work on this. And these are not just, our mailing list is 40,000 people. I don't have a Google map of all of them. These are folks that have spent a week or 8 months or 2 years working with us. And of course, it's like you run out of space to put all of these dots, and you can see where it's showing up. We had a guy last week from Algeria. He's like, I'm the only one in my whole country, that came to one of our workshops. So, and I have to say that in terms of the ripple of impact, for two biologists sitting around in a cafe in Montana not that long ago, and it wasn't until one of my students that graduated from the program sent me this, and I looked in the middle there and I saw Masters of Science in Biomimicry. Whoa! That's like chilling, down to the bones of, there's been some ripple of impact. The program that's starting here, and when those first degrees come out, that's huge. That's really huge. And then the other day, it occurred to me that these 169 people that are enrolled, they're gonna graduate. And they're gonna wanna go and make a job out of doing biomimicry. So what are they gonna go out and do in the world? And the next ones, and the next ones, and the next ones. So Jay mentioned, we are right there. We are at this place where this work is exploding, and it's in the research labs, and it's in the design studios, and it's happening in classrooms everywhere. And we see it in the boardroom when they're bringing biologists in. We talked about finance yesterday. Government is showing up and asking questions. And even just the whole world of biophilia that's saying, God, let's bring nature back into our lives again, is part of this story. It's a couple of recent ripples. I got to go fast, but to have the Obamas put biomimicry as a requirement in their specs for the presidential library. Janine and I got to have lunch with Michelle at the White House a few years ago. We're biologists from Montana with a cup of coffee, And then we heard yesterday about the Ray of Hope Prize. Not only did they give $100,000 to these amazing women from Chile to get this project off the ground, they were so excited about the rest of the projects that they went back and found $75,000 more and handed it out to the other winners. That's huge. And then this was just last week, this woman on the left here, that's Baroness Patricia Scotland, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth. And we've been in conversations with her, and I want to tell you a little quick ripple of impact story. Her advisor, her climate change advisor, Rola, heard about biomimicry and the fact that it had the potential to help draw down carbon. I know you're giving me the red flag. And she started browsing on the internet and watched a couple of videos of Janine's and of mine, and came across these things called these biomimicry leadership cards, this little deck of cards. And we had some out on the tables if you happen to get one. And ends up calling our friend Toby, who works in social innovation, and says, I'm in England and I need to order 3 of these decks of cards. Can you help me because your website's not letting me order? So they start an email dialogue about ordering decks of cards. Turns out those 3 decks of cards were Christmas presents for Prince Charles, Patricia Scotland, and the Queen of England last year. And that began this sort of dialogue around, and she's very interested in how biomimicry can help the 54 Commonwealth nations draw down carbon and work with the transition space. So lots of amazing people. And these are folks that over all of these years have been showing up, and they represent so many different corners of the earth and so many different disciplines and so much joy that is in all these people, and they fall in love with each other, you know, which is so cool. There's Laura. This was us hanging out on the mangrove roots not too long ago. So who's doing the ground truthing? It's not me. It's all of you. It's all of these people. And this takes more than a minute, so I might have to skip through it. But I wanted to just show, I mean, I can't even possibly talk about all of the amazing stories that are happening in the world. And it's not just these kinds of things that are the classic ROI, you know? This was the product, and this was the organism, and this is how much money it saved. It's all of this. It's all of this amazing good work that we're doing. And all of these are all of these different diverse kinds of seeds that are about what it takes to build biomimicry as a practice in this world. Because it's a mindset, it's an approach, it's an entirely different way of viewing nature. And we need all of these kinds of things happening in order for that good work to happen in the world. And so every one of you, whatever your background is, you have a place, you have a niche. There's something that you can do in this space, even if it's just leading a child out in the woods and having them fall in love. We have a woman we were just talking about in the car that is a microscopist, a scanning electron microscopist. And she wants to be in service of the field of biomimicry, providing really cool close-up images and getting kids to fall in love with nature when they geek out at how cool a fly looks like up close, right? And is that not the start of creating a love affair with the natural world that not only will you then want to take care of, you most definitely will want to learn from? Let's see here. It goes on and on and on. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. So, let's not forget this part of it. Whether you feel like you're standing on the left side or the right side, we are nature. And that important critical connection and our love affair is what gets us through all sorts of things. The exasperation, the frustration, the kind of crazy news that we got last week in America. This is what keeps me going, and I hope what keeps all of you going. Thank you.